So I was just saying while I was waiting for you to show up there that you're a nonviolent communication trainer. You're the author of this lovely, wonderful book, and you've studied a lot of interpersonal neurobiology and attachment theory and family constellations. You speak Russian and probably other languages that I don't know. So thank you so much for being here. Sarah lives in Vancouver, Washington, and she often comes up to Vancouver, BC. And that's how I got to know you. And, the first thing I want to talk to you about, because I'm a musician, I loved performing. I've loved watching performances. I love live theater so much. And I know you used to be an actor, and I'd just love to hear a little bit about how you became an actor, how that life was for you.
Wow. I became an actor because it seemed like it would be possible for something very true to come through, that there would be a way for something true to come through words. And I started out as an actor, and then I became an interpreter. And then again, it was like I was looking for something very true to come through words. And then I started doing this, and this seems like the truest of all.
Okay. Was it fun for you to be an actor? Was it a dream you'd had for a long time, or did it sort of come by accident?
Trying to remember how it started. I think it started it started a bit by accident. I was invited to do a one-act play at the University of Alaska, and the other person that I was cast in the one-act play with never learned their lines, so I never got to go on. But I loved the process, and so I got really interested in it and started acting in small films and acting and directing in community theater, and was down in New Mexico and did some community theater, and in Mendocino, California, and did community theater, and did independent film in the Seattle area. The film was the most boring because you would just wait for 5 or 6 hours, and then they'd film you for 30 seconds, and then you'd go wait again. So that was, it was independent film. So it was very, the film could only be made as the person made enough money to shoot. So I had to have the same hairstyle for like 3 years.
What was the film called?
It was called I Am the Night. It actually was screened at the Metropolitan Museum, the Museum of Modern Art in New York. It was screened at the Seattle Art Museum as well, and I got to go to the premiere. But it was a very small independent film, and very experimental, quite beautiful.
Yeah, when I love that you talk about wanting something true to come through. And for me, I was thinking about why do I love performing so much, and it's about wanting beauty to come through. And I think truth and beauty are so closely related. Wanting beauty to come through and land in a way that just lights up other people, and something very juicy and enlivening for me about that. Has it informed your work now at all? I mean, one of the things I've always loved about you is the way you express your teachings, your use of words, and it has a poetic leaning for me. Does that come from some of your acting? Or?
From acting and poetry. I was a poet for a while. Okay. And I think that's I've heard recently, or over the years, I've heard that being a poet is like the least saleable skill that one could possibly have. But what I've come to believe is that being a poet is the most important thing, and that it's the thing that we need the most. It's it's one of the clearest expressions of right hemisphere language that we have.
Mm-hmm.
It's no wonder that it seems not so marketable, but it seems foundational for everything. So acting and poetry, beautiful words, they all seem important when we're wondering if we understand someone else.
Uh,
The whole concept of resonance, the whole experience of moving into a connection where both people are saying, "Yes, you understand me."
mm-hmm.
It's easiest to get there if we have uh, some willingness to let words speak us,
Mm-hmm.
to let the movement that we feel in our bodies come through into whatever words are right for us. They don't have to be, Sarah's poetry words. They can be Eric's poetry words. They can be other people's poetry words. They can be very plain language. They can be,
Mm-hmm.
very descriptive, but there's some way that the words themselves are connected with the way that we are moved by one another. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's what we're both beginning to touch on here, you with your songs and also with your empathy, and
Mm-hmm.
me with this writing about resonant language.
And how did I definitely want to talk more about the resonance in the right hemisphere, but I want to follow the trajectory a little bit first. How did you get into being an interpreter?
Um, well, I had lived in Norway when I was in my teens, and I learned Norwegian, and it was a revelation to me that we didn't have to just speak English, because I'd been raised in, you know, in the interior of Alaska, where I guess if I'd been lucky, I might have learned a Native Alaskan language, but I didn't. I only was exposed really to English,
Uh-huh.
and I went off to Norway as a 15-year-old and spent a year there and found myself becoming fluent in Norwegian, and it was stunning. It was magical. It was like whole new worlds opened up, and I thought, oh, this is what I want to do. I want to do language. I had always thought I wanted to be a poet, and so I went to the University of Washington from Fairbanks, Alaska, where in the University of Washington I chose because they had 50 different languages.
Wow.
Yeah, there was a big school with all these different languages. So I went and I started out in Chinese, but I was I was taking Norwegian as well. I took a degree in Norwegian because I already spoke Norwegian.
Right.
But I was in this Chinese class um, with 38 uh, speakers of Cantonese, fluent speakers of Cantonese who were trying to learn Mandarin, and then there was me. So I was sadly behind. And the
Yeah.
day that they applauded when I was successfully able to answer the teacher's question, oh dear, I'm in trouble and they know it.
Yeah.
So I didn't last very long in that class, but I continued to take other languages and ended up discovering Russian, which
Yeah.
was a spectacularly beautiful language for people who love language. And
What makes
and,
it beautiful to you?
what makes it beautiful to me is the way that it fits together, the way that it just fits together like a beautiful, elegant puzzle where all of the grammar clicks into place very specific ways
Huh.
that allow the meaning to be carried throughout the whole sentence and not just like Morse code dashing from word to word. It's like
Mm.
an integrated whole.
Huh.
Uh, I think that's present in grammar in English. It's not so apparent because we don't have clear, we don't have words change their endings depending on what verbs we're using or what formality of speech we're in. But there's just so much that's explicitly delivered in a Russian sentence.
Mm.
It all fits quite neatly together and beautifully together. And then, of course, their poetry. The poetry in Russian is
Yeah.
unbelievable.
Yeah. I don't know anything about the poetry in Russia, so I'm going to have to explore that. Do you know anything about um, how different languages resonate in terms of, like, it seems to me some language just have more emotionality than others, not just culturally, but actually in the way the words are expressed. Like there's some that are more guttural and from the throat. Do you know anything about that?
Somebody recently said to me, "Why do you think Russian is beautiful?" I haven't thought Russian was beautiful when I heard it spoken, which I was surprised by because I find it quite lovely.
Uh-huh.
Um, but I wonder if there's, yeah, I don't know. There's something when you get into I think any language with any fluent speaker who has a sense of the aliveness of language. It's just really touches me.
Yeah.
I'm touched, yeah, by German. I'm touched by Spanish. When it's someone, I mean, Rilke, for goodness sake, wrote in German. And of course, we also have, I just lost your picture, Eric, but I'll keep going in case the
Okay.
recording is continuing to go. Um,
Can you still hear me?
yes, I can still hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there was a movie about Neruda, where Gabriel Garcia I think it's Marquez, was a policeman, but he was his. You could just tell that the language was so beautiful. Of
Mm.
course, Neruda's poetry was in it as well, but just the writing of the movie was quite beautiful. So we get to touch one another's cultural soul, I think.
Yeah. Lovely. Do you still, when you go to Norway now, are you able to speak enough to, or Russia, are you able to speak with people enough, or have you lost it?
In Norway, I can understand a lot, but I don't seem very smart.
With how you speak it?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So uh, I was, someone who had never met me before was sitting with me, and a friend of mine brought me a humor book, and the person across the table from me said, "Are you, are you just pretending that you understand?" But that's my Norwegian experience. I understand, but I don't speak very beautifully anymore.
Yeah.
Um, but in Russian, um, I I I speak well enough to actually be able to teach now.
Oh,
I
wow.
was in St. Petersburg maybe a year ago, teaching, and
Yeah.
did a 3-day there. Had a lovely friend who was standing up at the front with me and would fill in whenever I hit a word that I did not know. But
Oh, yeah.
it went quite well overall. My grammar was not perfect,
Sure.
but but I had a good willingness, and that goes a long way.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So how did you find your way to nonviolent communication? What happened that led you into this whole new direction in your life of teaching and
Yeah.
facilitating workshops? And
I had a child and discovered that I was a terrible mother,
Mhm.
and wanted to figure out how I could be a mother that was more like the other mothers that I saw in the world, who could create a sweet connection and responsive relationship with their children. So I was searching and searching, and I found nonviolent communication. And it was about the next, it was really, I think, a very strong 3-year effort, and then continuing to now, to present day, still having the sense of that I can use nonviolent communication and resonant language with my child as a way to have a different experience of being the parent than I
Mhm.
would if I was just trying to do it without it. So it's
Mhm.
a way to learn, um, a way to really awaken the relational right hemisphere
Right.
that lets us have a very different experience of being with people. If all we ever use our language for is to tell people what to do, or to tell our children what to do, or to complain about what they have done, then it's That's, the left hemisphere. That's so relational. I mean, so instrumental. That's the way my parents used language with me. And so I've been tremendously grateful, but I did find it because of my parenting.
Hmm.
Mm.
So your parenting changed in the sense that you were much more aware of how to be relational instead of just a taskmaster, or and you're able to increase the connection through the use of nonviolent communication and not just have it about, giving your child things to do or telling them what's wrong. And that
Yeah, but it took a long time.
yeah.
It took a very long time. I mean, it wasn't until 1.5 years ago. Um, I mean, I've hit these different stages with nonviolent communication and parenting where I've gone, oh, this is not the way I'm doing it is not good. I need to go more deeply into NVC in order to I need to actually live NVC instead of just speaking it. I need to, there's a series of deepening changes. But just 1.5 years ago, at the beginning of 2017, I said to myself, well, I've been using instrumental and uh, painful language with my son for 18 years now. Now it's time to try something different, to really commit to not using any instrumental language for the next year.
Can
And
can you just define that a little bit? The instrumental meaning just
telling him what to do,
telling him what to do. Yeah. Okay.
trying to influence him to do what I wanted him to do.
So you made a commitment to not do that for a
To
year.
myself, yeah. But I didn't tell anybody
Yeah.
because I didn't think I could do it.
How did it go?
Well, on on November 28th of 2017, I was going, oh, there are just 34 more days before I can tell my son what to do. And 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 then in December, it had been 11 months where he had not had to really what I really started to see was the way in which I would use words that I could see his body recoil. I
Hmm.
could see the painfulness, um, um, because I would do the same thing that my parents did with me, which was you start out a sentence just fine, like, I know you're going to the store. Would you be willing to pick up some milk? Right? It all seems innocent and fine. And then
Hmm.
you stick the knife in. And by the way, don't you go drinking with your friends,
Right.
just like jab, jab, jab. So I was like, this has to stop.
Right.
So and the only way I can think of to stop it is to just strictly stay with relational language, just strictly to stay with nonviolent communication, not with requests, but with feelings and needs, and with acknowledgement, and with catching what he said. Being more reflective
Hmm.
was part of my intention for that year, and creating connection and creating relationship without trying to make him do or be anything.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So
So
December,
were you
yeah.
not making? You weren't even making requests. Like you were leaving that part of
Right.
NBC.
Right. Not even making requests
Wow.
because NVC is an integrated left
Hmm.
and right hemisphere
Hmm.
experience, and you use the left hemisphere in nonviolent communication. In purely resonant language, you don't so much use the left hemisphere.
Okay.
You're really staying to the right. You're really staying in relational space. I mean, you might say how something's impacted you. Like, I'm really scared because I
Hmm.
really want your well being.
Hmm.
But you're not, angling for what you want. You're not pushing for it. You're not, it's
Right.
just, so yeah. So in December, all of a sudden, things got sweeter than they have ever been in my life with
Wow.
my child. It was like, I think that it took 11 months for his body to relax enough that he was, you know,
Able to
able
trust it.
able to trust enough to relax. Yeah.
Mhm.
and for there to be warmth between us. And I was like, oh my God, this is what I've wanted all my life.
Wow.
And what I had been continually undermining all my life because I was using language the way that my parents did, which of
Right.
course undermined rather than facilitated connection.
So where are you? No, go ahead.
And so then I thought, well, I'll commit for another year.
So are you still trying to not use requests?
Yeah. I mean, I explore things like, I need a ride to the airport. Is that something you'd be interested in doing?
Okay.
Which is different from, I need a ride to the airport. Are you willing to take me?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just, I really turned the volume down on.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say then to another parent who says, well, I want to be able to ask my children to clean up the room or to clean up the playroom when they're done or something, are you
Right.
going to say, is that something you're interested in doing, putting away your dishes? Or well, I know this is your own experiment, but I'm guessing a parent would want to know, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh. Well, I've been thinking lately that I want to write a different kind of parenting book that would
Uh-huh.
be the parenting book for people like me, but just putting dire circumstances in the title, you know. So your child has been to jail. The parenting book, parenting 113,
Right, right.
just like something that's y-
It's for the
the,
parents who really need the tougher, need to have more extreme measures, that kind of thing.
well, if by more extreme measures you mean that they are actually willing to give up the
Yeah,
idea that they
that's
can
what I mean.
make their children do anything,
Yeah,
and that they really want to build relationship.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, I don't even teach parenting classes right now because I feel like, oh my God, uh, um, oh my God. Well, if you were raising a child, wouldn't you want to take parenting classes with a from a parent who whose child does actually clean up the playroom when they're asked?
Right.
Wouldn't that be good?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that my market is for people who have to give up hope. Absolutely. and um and are ready and aching for something radically different, that they
Right.
want to live a different way. I mean, we're living in a world where we have to, what we've been doing, what my parents did with me, what my century has done with me, what my society has done with me, none of it's leading to a good end here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Getting people to do things is not leading to a good end.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So let's try something radically different. Let's
Mm-hmm.
move into radical relationality.
Mm-hmm.
Let's feel the sweetness and have a messy playroom.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And are you willing to go a little bit further with this example to, the child who is getting into risky behavior,
Yeah.
for that parent who's like, okay, I'm getting a sense of, I really need to work on the relationship, and
Mm.
um, there's risky behavior going on, and
Yeah.
I'm scared, and
Yeah.
it takes a while to build that. So what am I doing with the
Yeah.
risky behavior where I'm trying
What
to?
good questions. um, yes, they need to go to a different parenting book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because um, it just depends on what their child's body is doing when they have a conversation with them.
Right.
If they have a conversation with their child and they're like, I'm so worried about your well-being, and we need to work together to stop this drug use and to get you home and to make sure that you're okay. and their child's body stays soft and connected, and I mean, then there's all kinds of requests you can make.
Oh, I see.
The question is really, what is your child's body doing in response to the kind of language that you're using? And if you're using language of requests and your child's body is stiffening, then you're not going in, you're not going in the direction of connection. So it's there's something here about beginning to awaken our own capacity to see our children, which I think happens gradually with the experience of starting to do nonviolent communication, resonant language, doing the healing work, getting the self-connection. And then one day you wake up and you go, oh my God, I can see my child's body. So
yeah, thank you for that answer. And I want to highlight the part about doing our own healing work, because I think sometimes what's happening is the child is showing the parent something that they need to look at in themselves, so that they aren't projecting and creating a disconnect.
Yeah, it's true. One of the things I wonder about addiction. I mean, how many of us drink, regularly daily? How many of us, eat sugar regularly daily? How many of us smoke cigarettes regularly daily? I mean, we're giving our children a message, that life, unadulterated life, is not really quite bearable.
So where did interpersonal neurobiology, IPNB, where did that start to come in for you, and how has that informed nonviolent communication for you, and how has it informed, again, your mothering, your family life?
I discovered interpersonal neurobiology when I discovered Daniel Siegel. And I discovered, just the way I discovered Marshall Rosenberg, which was, I used to be a used and rare book dealer, as you can see my used and rare book stock behind me here. And I would drive all over the Pacific Northwest, so I'd get all kinds of DVDs and listen to them, not DVDs, CDs, and listen to them on the CD player in the car and listen. That's how I discovered Marshall Rosenberg. And then that was also how I discovered Daniel Siegel. I started listening to his neurobiology of we. And I just listened and listened. I listened over and over again. I would play the tracks over and over again, trying to follow through. It seemed such important life-saving material, especially he does such a beautiful job with attachment in that book. And so getting familiar with that.
So you're driving around the state looking for rare books and learning all about interpersonal neurobiology. Okay.
And then the Portland State University started an interpersonal neurobiology certificate program. And I went, and that's where I met Bonnie Badenoch, and I was like, wow, this is really different. This is something very different from anything I've ever experienced before. Meeting Bonnie was really a watershed moment for me.
What's her book again?
Her book is called Being a Brainwise Therapist, but she just published a new one called In the Heart of Trauma, or The Heart of Trauma.
The Heart of Trauma.
The Heart of Trauma. It's so beautiful.
So you're already studying nonviolent communication, practicing nonviolent communication. Now you're going to the State University to study interpersonal neurobiology.
And I was like, wow, this really can be synthesized with NVC. And so I was, at the time, I was volunteering teaching at the women's prison south of Portland, Oregon. And I started bringing this synthesis in, and the women loved it. And when I was teaching nonviolent communication on its own, I would end up after 12 weeks with one person in the class. And I started adding the brain material, and I ended up with, 6 people would make it all the way to the end. And as I became more at ease with teaching, gradually got to retain more and more folks. Because they were so interested in the brain, and because it does give us a platform that we can stand on to look at ourselves with compassion.
And help us make more sense of our lives and why we struggle with certain things. And it gives us hope too, because the brain is neuroplastic.
Yeah.
For me, it's always been this sense, oh, here's the manual no one ever gave me for this, this, machine here. And wow, that's nice to know that this is how that goes and this is what happens then.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you started coming up to Vancouver, where in my neighborhood, to start to share your synthesis of these two things. That's where I started assisting you and getting to know you and getting also very inspired with it all.
I didn't meet you before that. I met you before.
That's right.
In Victoria at an but a big training, and I found it very inspiring to meet you. You were one of my heroes.
I remember that fondly. Yes. I remember that from that training, you had such a good example of implicit memory getting triggered and having this huge trauma response, I think you would call it, right? In the middle of that training.
Yeah. I was speaking about nonviolent communication and neuroscience it was an opportunity to speak before a certified trainer of nonviolent communication who might even say, yes, I really see what you're doing here, Sarah. Good work. Keep up the good work. But instead, the person I presented for did not really like the combination of neuroscience and NVC. And so I began to cry, and I couldn't stop crying for 6 hours.
Yeah.
I went to my bedroom and I cried until my pillow was wet. This is indeed a trauma response.
Yeah.
And then I went out into the hall. I called all my friends, long distance, paid huge international telephone charges because all my empathy buddies were in the U.S.
Right.
And got up finally after 6 hours, went out in the hall, and the guy was standing there. And when I looked at him up close, his eye was only half open, sort of like that.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I had a flashback. I was like, oh, this is flashing back to a childhood experience. Yeah. And the clearing of that experience of being trapped and having someone be perhaps unhappy with what I was trying to do
publicly.
Really changed my ability to be in front of people, made me much calmer. So it was a beautiful healing experience because I managed to connect with the little one that I had been just 3 years old when I received this message that I wasn't doing okay. And then
from a character that had slightly closed eyes.
Yeah, a fellow it was that I was invited to be a guest on a children's TV show that was the Batman and Robin TV show, and the person who was playing the penguin on the TV show did a little riddle session with the children who were all 9 years old, but I was 3, so I couldn't answer any of the riddles. So he kept asking all these riddles, and all the children were leaving the bleachers that we were sitting on, and I was left there alone crying, 3 years old, with this penguin who looked very angry at me. Yeah. So in that moment when I saw this guy's eye at half-mast, I was like, oh my God, the penguin was being paid to be a villain on TV. He couldn't go pick up the little crying 3-year-old and say, let's get you a toy, honey. Get off the stage. He had to figure out how to get the 3-year-old off the bleachers and still be a villain.
A villain, right.
Yeah. So it just completely, that understanding just completely cleared out my sense of that I wasn't doing it right.
Yeah, and maybe that you were in danger even.
Right. Yeah. It was scary. Yes. So that was a huge healing experience for me, really accompanied by empathy, but gave me this sense of how we can carry traumas within us that we don't even know they've been touched. We may know we have the trauma, but we don't even know when they've been touched.
When they get reactivated, you mean, by touch?
When they get reactivated, we don't know which trauma it is that's been activated.
And I usually tell people that trauma means that your system has been overwhelmed. Its capacity to feel something, to sequence the experience through the nervous system and then make sense of it has been overwhelmed. And so it doesn't integrate into the hippocampus, into the whole memory system clearly. And then I was reading an article with Bruce Perry, an interview with Bruce Perry, and he added to that definition something like that it affects behavior from then on as well.
Oh, what a beautiful, yeah, beautiful comment.
Yeah.
I always say that it's something difficult, a difficult experience, too much for us, that we have been unaccompanied in, that
Unaccompanied.
we've been alone in. Yeah,
Yeah.
that we've not
And
been accompanied with warmth or precision.
yeah, that's the accompanied with warmth, support, empathy,
Yeah.
because we could be
Mhm.
accompanied with criticism and not. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And so then the behavior change is that there's any time you're in a situation of publicly being on, performance or being asked
Mm.
to do something, there's this response of fear and so on.
Mm.
And then
Anticipating.
the cool thing is that that trauma is available to be integrated anytime we do have the companionship, the empathy, the warmth that we didn't get to have back then. And so that was you calling out to empathy buddies, getting
Mm-hmm.
empathy, making sense of it all, and
Mm-hmm.
and really shifting your experience.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah. And in terms of attachment theory, the relational dynamics and the attachment trauma, do you have anything else to add in terms of trauma in the context of attachment trauma?
Mm. Well, certainly when we're talking about language, the way that we use language with each other leaves traces on the brain.
Mm,
Really, language is carries the packets of information by which we change one another more than anything else. I think we change one another with touch. We
mm,
change one another with traumatic touch. We change one another with warm and resonant and safe touch. Um, but much more common in our world is the experience of being changed by language, um, changed by our own language with ourselves, changed by our language with others. So that what we're doing with words is we are allowing the messages of our body to be fully received so that our bodies can relax. This
mm,
is this is a little bit what our bodies are looking for when we bring experience from the gut and from the heart into words. Our body is looking for are these the right words? When
mm,
we hear ourselves speak these words, or when somebody else speaks these words, are they the right words to match the experience of the body?
mm,
And so secure attachment is more than anything else the words that we use with one another really matching the body's experience. And then avoidant attachment is the way that we'll use words instrumentally to tell people what to do, where we're not connecting in any way with with the experience of the body. And then
Or avoidant attachment might also be that the words are there, but there isn't the resonance. There isn't the
yeah,
the right
yeah.
hemisphere connection with the words.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because the right hemisphere is listening for everything else that goes with words that's not um, the content. The left hemisphere is listening for the content,
Yeah.
but the right hemisphere is listening for how alive is my voice?
Mm-hmm.
Does it match my gestures? How's my facial expression?
Is there
Um,
eye contact? And yeah.
yeah. And how quickly am I speaking? How slowly am I speaking? What's the pain? What's the intensity? What's the
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Um,
So if I said to you, oh yeah, Sarah, I really get you. You know, and there's not a lot of right hemisphere going on there, and
unless you're resonating with me being incredibly distracted and
right. In fact, that reminds me of a pivotal moment in my life after a
Oh,
workshop with you, and
oh,
you were receiving empathy from me and another friend, and I gave you some non-resonant needs guesses. I'll never forget this moment. I was, I've been avoidantly attached recoverer for a while. And in the midst of your, really tender states of working through something very difficult, you said something like, "Thank you for that guess, Eric. Could you add a little warmth to your voice?" that was my wake up call. That empathy needs to be more than just, can't be Siri from the computer given the empathy. There needs to be a
yeah.
person.
Oh, very sweet.
So there, in terms of attachment trauma, we're talking about the miss of naming the experience in the body in a way that the person can really feel understood, can really feel the understand, hear it and feel it.
Yeah. And Beatrice Beebe talks about attachment being a byproduct of human rhythms and human rhythmicity.
And what was the second word? Human
Rhythmicity.
rhythmicity. Okay. Yeah.
And so what she says is that with secure attachment, there's there's a play of rhythms. There's a responsiveness and there's a timing, but the timing's not too close. So both people still exist.
Okay.
With avoidant attachment, there's no contingency in the rhythms between the two people. Nothing really is happening rhythmically. The farther out you get into avoidant attachment, the less is happening rhythmically. And then as we come on the other side of the U curve into ambivalent attachment, that there's too much similarity of the rhythms.
Okay.
So the rhythms are identical. One person is inside the other person's rhythm instead of there being two people's rhythms.
Right.
And then that we can go out on either end into disorganization.
Yeah.
That as we get farther away from rhythmic interplay, we're moving into disorganization, and this is punitive controlling disorganization. And as we get farther out into way too much overlap and submergence in one another's rhythms, then we move into codependence and compulsive caretaking.
Right.
So there's this sort of inverted U of attachment that Beatrice Beebe speaks about, that I think is really important when we're thinking about how we use rhythms and what people need in terms of healing rhythms of responsiveness from trauma.
Yeah. So the rhythm you're talking about is the exchange of expression coming out, and it's coming through and back in ways that are balanced, and there's resonance, there's a responsiveness, a responsiveness that the child can receive because it's in a rhythm that is matching their experience and giving them space for who they are.
Right. And adults, you and I, in this interview, are we in a rhythmic interchange that's contingent and connected? Yeah.
And so that would, I was just going to say, if I were interrupting you all the time, or if I just had a blank stare when you're done, and there's or if I said something back that had nothing to do with what you had just shared.
Right. Which will often happen in interviews when somebody has their list of questions and they run out of their creative, contingent response, and they just read that next question without any segue in your interview. Yeah, that'll happen.
It's an interesting. This is where NVC can be really helpful with the reflecting back. Although sometimes I find that that overlaps a little bit too much. There's
exactly.
almost an insistence that I tell you back what I'm hearing. And
exactly. Then that comes over here on this side where the rhythms are too tight instead of, but sometimes people need that.
yeah,
If they've been if it's been way too far out, then it needs to be here. Or if it's been so far over here that there's never been any reflection at all, then sometimes we need to start here, I think, to be able to come back towards an easy center.
and that's where we need to be doing our own work so that we can be really attuned to someone else's rhythm and be able to pick up the cues that let us know if we need to be closer or a little more spacious.
Right. And this is, this is what I was talking about how we begin to learn to see our children and our conversational partners, that we see how their bodies respond to our words.
Yeah.
The building, I think that, that words are our foundation, but really before we're verbal, for the first 18 months, before anything is about words or content, it's all about rhythm, emotion, contingency in terms of understanding one another, but it's not verbal, it's nonverbal. So there's a huge foundation that's nonverbal. I don't want to minimize that in any way. That then becomes a later piece of our adult interactions.
Yeah, and sometimes you can see with a very young baby, they're getting too much attention. They're trying to have a better rhythm for themselves because everyone's just so enthralled with them. And,
right.
They start waving.
Yeah. So how do we then, learn to step back and make space? I think this is what I didn't know to do with my baby. I think I'm sure I was looming all the time and didn't really know how to make any space for him to exist. I couldn't read those cues. I was in an alarm state as a young mom. I think that so many young moms are. And of course, as we know from learning Stephen Porges' work about the nervous system, when we get alarmed, we go out of our capacity to really decode and understand each other with nuance. Yeah.
So then family constellations come in, right?
Yeah.
NVC, IPMB, attachment theory, and then how did you discover the whole family concept? Next, that's funny. In my experience, I would see you every once in Vancouver, and it seemed like every time you showed up, you had some new amazing area or direction you were going in, and all of a sudden it was family constellation.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, family constellations are really interesting. I'd done enough work on myself that I was starting to teach and trying to figure out how to get the synthesis of nonviolent communication and interpersonal neurobiology out into the world. And I was co-teaching with another woman in Seattle in a day-long workshop where she did one part of the day and I did another part of the day. Right. She was a Constellations facilitator. And she placed me in a constellation. I was like the fourth generation back of French ancestors from before the migration of this family of the person who was receiving the constellation. And I was in the back and I was crying. I was standing in the back and I was just like, I felt so much love for my descendant. And I was like, whoa, what's happening? How did I suddenly get catapulted into somebody else's family system? This seems very interesting and odd. So I started to learn family constellations and to bring to study with different people who teach. And I studied with Jane Peterson here in the Portland, Oregon area, and with Mark Johnson in the Seattle area. And I kept wondering, how can nonviolent communication be integrated here? Because there's quite a tradition in constellations of being really, really directive. Language that's like, stand here, do this, say that. There's so
the facilitator
the facilitator is telling the people what to do. I was like, what would this be like if it were collaborative? What would this be like if it were empathy based?
Mm-hmm.
And so then I started a 10-year so far exploration of what's it like to bring nonviolent communication now and family constellations together, and then interpersonal neurobiology as well. What's it like to
Mm-hmm.
bring the brain in? So that leads to doing brain constellations. So you get all kinds of things going on. I was doing a constellation in Europe, and the person who was receiving said that they just never really felt like themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And as they began to speak, they shared that they had had multiple head injuries.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, let's put your brain in.
Hmm.
So we put the brain in,
Meaning
and
someone went into the
yes,
constellation to
in your
represent that person.
constellation, you can represent anything that you want to. You
Mm-hmm.
can represent your mother. You can have somebody come in to represent your grandmother. You can do it with objects. You can say, "Here is my mother, and here
Mm-hmm.
is my grandmother, and I
Mm-hmm.
am here. This is me, and
Yeah.
how do I feel about?" And already I can feel this very interesting, like
Yeah.
uh, beginnings, because that's the way that our brain organizes relationship. What's known, it organizes relationship spatially.
But
So
traditionally, it's meant it's been done with a group of people, and people are
yeah,
brought
well,
in
it
to
can be done,
represent.
traditionally it's also been done with objects.
Oh, is that
So
right?
it's,
Okay.
yeah, both ways, both
Okay.
ways. But it's fun. It's funner with a group of people
Mm-hmm.
because they'll say things.
Yeah. Yeah.
They'll say, "Oh, as your mother, I feel very ambivalent about you," and you'll go, "Oh,
Mm.
that's true." My mother.
What a relief to have that name,
Yeah,
that
exactly.
knowledge.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So, so the
So, what did the brain have to share of this person who was?
oh, the brain was wonderful. The brain was like, "Oh, I have taken so many hits, and I'm really, and I love you."
Oh.
It was very beautiful, very, very beautiful to be in the presence of that. And there have been multiple constellations that I've done where that kind of thing will come out. A brain injury will come, or
Mhm.
sometimes uh, a part of family history makes sense,
Mhm.
uh, that helps a brain to make sense.
Mhm.
Someone who can't remember anything, and then
Right.
we discover their parents were, that their grandfathers were in charge of the Nanking massacre, in the Japanese massacre in Nanking. So you'll find out all kinds of things that like that the family itself couldn't remember because what needed to be remembered was too overwhelming.
Mm.
So then, no wonder the individual, doesn't remember things in the context of this family. The thing very relieving for people and beautiful, and allow a different kind of conversation with the self.
Mhm. Mhm. And is that what you're doing mostly these days when you're traveling? Is that mostly around family constellation work, or is it?
To some extent, it's family constellation work, but I was just, but sometimes it's the NVC communities that are bringing me to do an integration of NVC and neuroscience.
Mhm.
So, for example, I'll be in England next week, and I'll be doing a constellation series, 2 days of constellations in Leicester, and then I'm going to Frome, and in Frome I'll be doing the interpersonal neurobiology of conflict
Okay.
with an NVC community.
Yeah.
So the two communities tend to be the ones that bring me, either an NVC community or a constellations community. And, mhm.
Which is a nice segue to my next question. In that, I know we're almost out of time, but you know, I wonder if you have anything to say about social change or longing to create a different world that works better for everyone, a sustainable way. Anything in terms of the interpersonal neurobiology and
Mm.
anything else, attachment theory, constellations, and you see could really help those groups or that are missing or commonly missing when you work with groups.
Mm. I almost feel like this brings us back to the parenting question in a way.
Mm.
Like, what is it like? Um, to live relationally with each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what is it like to share a dream? And how can we change the systems of our world so that it's something very different than what it has been? And are
Mm-hmm.
we willing to admit that what we've been doing isn't working? And if you're willing to admit that what's been happening in every particular isn't really working anymore, then you become willing to change everything. Mm.
I often think that it's similar. Another way I think of saying your answer there is, are we willing to slow down and do less and work more relationally? Because generally, fear needs to slow down to feel the connection more. But most of us have grown up in a very left hemisphere society where there's been a lot of emphasis on getting things done and having goals. And now I think that's just transferring to the social change framework, that people, of course, we need to get things done, and there's lots to do in social change, but it's just another version of not enough room for the right hemisphere because we got so much to do.
Yeah.
So there's a fundamental piece there that I believe needs to shift around. Can we allow ourselves and make the time for the relationship?
Yeah. And oh, if only we had enough time to do it.
Well, maybe that's the finish point right there. Is there anything else you want to say there, Sarah, in order to?
No, just thank you, Eric. Thanks for having me on and asking
Yeah.
such beautiful and interesting questions that let us think about these things together.
Thank you so much for coming on. This is a dream to be an interviewer for a long time and do this exact thing. And I've known you for several years now, so it's fun. It was just to go over the span of your life and get to know you more and reflect on where you, Sarah. I shudder to think how my life would look had we not met. And if anybody listening to this recording who wants, empathybrain.com.
Yes.
And you do monthly teleseminar and courses and workshops, and you're generally full with one-on-one sessions, but there's all those other options. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. And this lovely book here. So have a wonderful
recorded book.
Say again.
Soon to come out as a recorded book from Recorded Books.
Oh, yes. That's awesome. Have a wonderful time there in England and Slovenia.
Thank you.